Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and my co-host today is Janelle Blue. Janelle is president of our sponsoring organization, the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. And our guest today is Char McCargo Ba. Char is a professional genealogist, and she has a business called FindinThingsforU. Before we get into the topic today, I want to make our viewers aware of two resources in the area for African American research. The Fairfax Genealogical Society has a special interest group that meets out in Centerville once a month, and you can go to their website, fxgs.org, for information. And also the Family History Center for Washington, D.C., that is actually located out in Kensington, Maryland, also has a special interest group. So if you're looking for a group to get help, these are two resources. So today we're going to talk some more. We had done an earlier show with Char about research, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some of her projects that she is doing. So what do you have of real interest that you're currently working on?
I'm currently working on two projects, one with the city of Alexandria and locating descendants of a housing unit they tore down. And they did not have the names of who were living there. And the research was supposed to cover from 1941, when the place was built, to 1965. But after that, it became a public housing unit. It was built during World War II to house government and military personnel that were African Americans. So it was a segregated unit. And so the city hired me to find descendants because they're building a new building there. It was 15 units, and the new building is going to be 52 units, and it's going to be high rise. And they want to tell the history of what was there, you know. And so they hired me to do that. And then my second project is with the Virginia Theological Seminary, and to locate descendants of the people who worked there. And also they're looking for the people who helped build. It was enslaved people who built them. The seminary said they never owned any slaves, so they rented them from people who owned slaves. And so they're identifying who they are. So it's two different groups. I'm working with the 1865 to 1951. That's their date. 51 is when they said they look at it. After that, it was the civil rights movement. Maybe that's when they started documenting who worked there.
When we first started talking about this, I was so fascinated because how do you research somebody if you don't have any names?
Okay, for the seminary project, I have location. I have a period of time. And back in the day, people worked where they live, not commute like we commute. And so I looked into the community, and I looked through the census. And on the census, it asked them their occupation and who they worked for.
Okay.
And I built the names up on that period of time. And then I looked in if you get to 1920, 1930, you're going to find descendants, because that's not too far ago, you know,
Right.
compared in the world of genealogy.
Right.
So up to 1940, we got the same family names, surnames, living in that community. And then I started using institutions that chances are African Americans joined, black churches where they joined. And they had a particular church that was built in that community called Oakland Baptist Church. It's an African American church. And those families were going to that church. Now, who is going there now with their same surnames?
Did they keep good records? Do they have good church books?
I didn't look at their records. I'm talking to people, and I know the people. So basically it was the Wanzas, Turles, and Shorts, McKnights, and their descendants are still living in the community, and some of them are living in Maryland, whatever. So that's how I built up the names of who's staying there.
Wow.
For the housing development, they had no names. And another thing too, I relied heavily on the city directories because we were
That's what
working
I
in the
was trying
city.
to say. Did they have
sure.
city
Yes,
directories?
city
for that?
directories. And so where the census give you a 10-year caption, the city director give you year from year, and tax records give you year from year. And so I was able to know all the way up until the for the seminary, up into the, I still think they do city directories. They do them for.
I don't know in Virginia when they stopped. I always was of the understanding that kind of when telephone directories came into existence, then they phased them out. But surprise, surprise, I was in the Special Collections Library down on Queen Street in Alexandria and found a 1977 city directory that I'm listed in.
Yeah.
I bought a condo in the city in 76 and I'm listed there. And I know the Library of Virginia has them into the 70s. I don't remember just how far.
So I'm not too sure, but I thought they might not do them as frequently, and it's heavy advertised like like the telephone book. But with that, you're almost going to get somebody here in the the 20th century, close to the in the 20th century, and you get that you can find them because you got people who are probably their neighbors who still live in the neighborhood. So that's one of the things. So what happened is that I've gone through that and built up the names of the people who were living there. They lived in that particular development and able to. Then I go to the community. Because I'll call my old people, and I give them a call. Such and such, and they ask me what street do they live on? Because I'm finding out that if you lived in one part of Alexandria, you never probably went to the other part of Alexandria. And when I was growing up, we had friends all over, so we walked Del Rey and different places. So they'll tell me no, but you need to talk to so and so because so and so grew up in that area, and so that's how I've been uncovering. I have the name now because I built that up, going through the city directory, going through the tax records. For older, but as you get closer to the 20th century and further in the 20th century, the tax records are not available to you. So it was a city directory that basically I was heavily used. And then I'll do all of my other genealogical research with vital statistics and 1940 census. But my periods for finding descendants for the housing projects started in 1941. So it's no 1950 census for me to capture. The place wasn't even built until they started building in 1941.
Yeah. Well, maybe soon, though.
Yes. Yes.
April 1st, 2022.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
What about, did they do school censuses? I know in Fairfax County, I think they've stopped doing it, but they used to do a school census, so they would, in preparation for what their needs were going to be, they asked questions.
If it is, I have not found those, but
anything.
what I did, I made friends with the activists for the school system, and I went there, and they allowed me to go through the books.
Wow.
So I saw another thing is knowing the history of every area you research. So during that period of time, it was a segregated school. Parker Gray school was the segregated school for all African Americans living in Alexandria, only one school. And they have an alumni group that I belong to. So I tapped into the people there. Yeah. I didn't go to it when it was a high school. I went there when after the civil rights and it became a middle school. I got in based on my great uncle who was a member, because you have to have somebody who graduated from there to be a member. So I tapped in on the people there to find out. And then I was also able to go to the archives of the school board and look through their records and got the name. And was able to see the addresses, the names of the people who attended. So using what we basically say untraditional genealogical records, because of the period of time we're dealing with, it's more recent. So a lot of things might be locked out because of restrictions, but some things they have not put restrictions on.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's an interesting source, the school board.
That was one of the things that I was going to ask, but you shared it before I got to ask. Particularly when we get into these restrictions, you really have to take and look at other things. It's like, death certificates are often restricted. But if you can get a hold of funeral home records or cemetery records, you may get the answers that you're looking for. for?
For the population at the housing that I'm researching, that was a very mobile community because they were in the military and they worked for federal. So one particular one I found, last name Tivy, T-I-V-Y. There's no Tivies in Alexandria, and it's not an Alexandra, like I say, name. That Tivy came from the West Indies with his grandmother to New York, and then when he came 18, he enrolled in the military. And he got married and he got stationed in Alexandria and he lived there for about 4 years. I was able to find his descendants. Yes, I was able, all his daughters are living, one in California, a niece in Washington, D.C., and one is in New Jersey. And I was able to locate, and he ends up being a minister when he gets out. He's a Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a Seventh-day Adventist church in the neighborhood in Alexandria, walking distance from where he was living. And so I was able to find, that was the first one I found. And so I documented them. They sent me pictures. And matter of fact, they sent a picture of the granddaughter, sent a picture of her grandfather and her grandmother when they got married, the day they got married.
Goodness.
Be able to find people and have those resources. You also had mentioned that you have an interesting find in your family with your great uncle.
Yes.
And I want to hear about it.
This was like 2003, I think, or 2004. I get an email from a German citizen asking me, could I help him locate his Afro-American father? And he said he'd been looking for 30 years. And he basically told me that the things that he tried going through VA, everything I would have tried, he did, but he did not have Social Security number. He did not have dog tag numbers, military numbers and stuff like that. And his father's name was James Clark. And I said, he got to be kidding.
Clock? Like the clock?
Clark.
Oh, Clark.
Yes. I said, he got to be kidding. Any Clark, I don't care, whatever, you're going to find James and John.
Right.
I said, what else do you have? He said, well, my mother told me before he went into the military, he was living in Lynchburg, Virginia on Early Street.
Oh, wow, that's a great clue.
And that's all he had. So I said, okay. I said, no, I don't think I'm going to take you. I said, it'd be funny if I do take you. We might be related because my James Clark also was in the military. And so he said, so I told him I probably couldn't help him, I said, because every Clark I find is going to be a John, going to be a James, definitely going to have a James. And that's all you have. And so anyway, so then he told me, he said, well, he'd been trying to study African Americans and that he goes to the U.S., military base in Germany, and he reads James Baldwin. I said, oh, God. And then he said, I listened to African American music. He said, Lou Rawls. I said, oh, Lou Rawls is mine. Then he told me, he said, I was born after, at the end of after the war in 1947. Well, I was born in 57. I said, he said, during the time he was affected by German, about the different laws that were put in place. If you were a mixed race, you only can go to the 8th grade. They take you out, and then they train you for a job. And
technical thing.
And he was trained to be a baker. He said, but he learned that if he go into the military, he can finish and get his high school diploma, and then he can go to college. So he went into the military, and he said became a social worker. I said, oh my God. I said, my daughter's a social worker. And then he said, I'm born October the 8th. I said, okay, I'll take you. I said, my daughter was born on October the 8th. And so I took him. I said, I only know one thing that I probably can, be able to locate your father, at least, to be able to research him. I have to look at the city directory because I have to get him before he went into the military, and he has to be living on Early Street in Lynchburg. So I told him I'll get back with him. I drove down to Richmond and I used their city directories, and I started with 1935 because I needed to get him before he went into the military. And I know we went, I think the U.S. went in the military in 1941 or 42. They went in late. So I go through, and Lord, I saw about 5 or 6 James Clark. So I said, oh my God. And every year, but it started dropping off. And then I get to, I go through 35, 36, 38. When I get to 1940, it's 2 James Clarks. And one of them is living on Early Street. And I started screaming, oh my God. I said, don't you move. Don't you dare move. And he was a cook, and he was renting a room. I can't remember the number street, but say for the sake of saying it was maybe 810 Early Street. So then I said, I had a great aunt named Mary Jane Clark who married a Samuel Martin, and they lived in Lynchburg. I said, while I'm here, let me just see where they lived. And he said that his father was living with his sister before he went into the military. And I looked up, he was renting a room, and Sam Martin, who's married to Mary Jane Clark, owned the house at 811 Early Street. And I screamed. And everybody came and said, what's wrong, Miss Ball? I said, I'm having the big one. I know it. I said, oh, I got to call my husband. So I run and call my husband, and he's a teacher. And I said, get him out of the class. It is emergency. So everybody said on the loudspeaker, Mr. Ball, come to the office. It's emergency. I said, I need you to give me a calling card. What? A calling card. I got to call Germany. because I have never talked to Harold, is his name. We've emailed each other. And when I called him, it was 3:30 in the morning, his time. He didn't answer. I hung up. I kept calling. He finally answered. I said, hello? I said, Harold, this is Char. Char, who? I said, the genealogist. Oh, the genealogist. Oh. I said, Harold, I found your father. My papa. I said, wait a minute, he's dead now. But I found him. I said, and guess what? I said, he's deceased. And he said, oh. I said, but you have a lot of cousins. He said, cousins? I said, yes. I said, I'm one of them.
Oh my.
And he started, he said, what? I said, your James Clark is my James Clark. And see, I never met my uncle when he was living. And so I had to get pictures of him for my other relatives. And when Harold came, this was a whole year. From that time, I spent one whole year, spent over $10,000 in locating, because every place that James went in the U.S., I was going to be able to tell that story. And Harold decided he was coming to visit us for 17 days. And he was no cheap visitor either. So we rented a van, and we took him to New York. His father was stationed at Fort J in New York, which is now, I think, Battery Park area. And then we took him to Roanoke, Virginia. His dad was in Roanoke. He was in Lynchburg. His dad is originally from Halifax County, Virginia.
Okay.
And he went there because he had a sister there and to get a job. And so I went to Salem, Virginia, to the VA hospital, because that's where his dad died. He was in a nursing home. I took him to the nursing home that his dad was in Pennsylvania County, Virginia. And then I took him to Salem, Virginia, to the hospital. By the time he got here, before he came, I had researched his dad. I had everything that I could find about his dad, even his autopsy report and what he had in his stomach when he died.
Oh my gosh.
Were you able to get his military records?
Yes.
Okay.
Harold could not get his records, so I had Harold do a letter, send it to me. I wrote the letter, sent it to him, sign it, and then send it back to me. And I worked at VA, so I was a policy writer. Okay. So I tried to do it the right way. So anyway, so we submitted it because his father, he didn't have his father's last name. There's no way they knew that was his son. So he said, no, I can prove that I am the niece. And so they said, okay, they'll let me see the records, but I couldn't take them. So I said, I had him come to VA. I had the records come to VA's benefits section. I went there and I Xeroxed the whole file. He did state when they asked him a question, how many children do you have? For that small moment, maybe he was going to do the right thing and said he had 2, but he had a daughter by that time, and he was married to the daughter's mother, and he just mentioned her name but didn't mention the other child's name, which probably was Harold. By the time Harold comes to the U.S. to see us, I had gotten pictures of my uncle to know what he looks like. And Harold looked identical. He's just a lighter version of his father.
Oh my God.
Identical. And to keep his weight down, he always go around on a bicycle. His dad also was mentioned in his military. He had a weight problem, trying to keep his weight down, but identical. And so he got to meet relatives. He got gobs and gobs and gobs of relatives. Because my grandmother, which is his grandmother, which is his aunt, she alone had 24 children, 4 sets of twins, 17 made it to adulthood.
Poor woman.
Yes. And so they all kind of had a lot of children. I took him to the homestead where his grandfather is my great-grandfather, and he owned 144.5 acres of land. It's no longer in the family, so I got permission from the family who owns it. They kept the house that my great-grandfather built, and they used it as a moose lodge. And so they allow us to go there and see. And so we did that, found his father's grave.
Oh, I was going to ask you that.
Yes, I found his father's grave, though everybody told me he didn't have a headstone. I said, oh, no. It would not have cost my family anything because he was military. And believe me, they don't let anything free go by. Yeah. He has one. and the undertaker that we talked to, he said, no. He said, Miss Barr walked up and down the cemetery, and he doesn't have one. I said, we're coming. So when Harold came, we divided that cemetery into 4. And my husband worked one side, Harold worked one side, the funeral director, and I was the one who found him with the headstone.
There was a headstone?
There was a headstone. Yeah. And Harold said, how you know it's my daddy? I said, all this research and I don't know who your daddy when I find him. I said, look, that's his troop. I mean, his infantry, his name, this and this, everything was there. And so, so when he came to the airport, I had a whole family there with balloons and everything. It was, and he ends up calling us because it was like a storm and they had to bring the plane down, and he got off and he said, don't leave me because I don't know where I'm going. I said, no, we're here, so he can see. Yeah, so it's been, was interesting, very interesting. From that, he turns around and asks me to do research for 3 other Germans who were in the same situation. One of them, his father was dead just like Harold's father, but he had half siblings. And I talked to their mother, and she did not want her children to know. So she refused to speak to him. So that's kind of sad. And so then the other one, the client could not speak English. I don't speak German. And so Harold did the translation. I found his dad, and his dad never told his wife that he left this child behind. And so when I talked to the dad, I said, don't you think you need to tell your wife? He said, well, give me some time. Well, it took 3 days, and then he called me back. He said, okay, I told her. Because he said, this happened before I got married. I said, that's your business, not mine.
Yeah, right.
And so what happened is that he said, I'm ready to talk to him. I said, well, your son do not speak English. He said, but I can speak German. I said, okay. And I got him on the phone, and it was emotional. So I told him, I said, my job is done, to have a happy life, and they're done. So it wasn't as hard as I thought it was, but I think we tend not to, we look at our expertise, and when we're given a new task, we think it's going to be, but we don't realize how experienced we are from all the years that we've been doing it. And so it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
Going back to the marker grade, I have said that if we will listen, our ancestors, a lot of them, want to be found. I've had experiences in cemeteries, kind of similar, but it's only been me where I know they are there, but I can't find a resource. There's no office or that kind of thing, and I will just walk the grounds and find them. One of them was a huge cemetery in New Jersey, and I knew there was 2 to 3 tombstones. There was a husband and wife and a child that died when about 14 years old, and a huge, like a real city block cemetery. And I tend to go to the left when I'm doing things like that because I'm left-handed. But I decided I'm going to try over in this area where there was not as much. And sure enough, there they were, sitting right in the middle of the cemetery there. Tombstones I had been trying. I knew they were there because I had transcriptions, but I couldn't tell anything from the transcriptions to find it, and there wasn't an office or anything like that.
But your client had one of the most important pieces of information, and that was the location where he lived, and very specific in this case.
And he didn't have the number. It's that once I found a James Clark living on Early Street in the city directory, then I had the number to the house, and I went to the house. It was a duplex. and I couldn't talk to any neighbors because Mary Jane Clark Martin died in the 1944. The other clue is that her father had a daughter after he was born with someone else, and he married her. He didn't marry his mother. And he named, my uncle named that daughter, kind of kooky man though, named the daughter after Pearl's mother.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, it was a two-part name, Mary after his sister and Lisa after Harold's mother, Mary Lisa.
And did you ever locate her?
I found her, but she had died. She had polio real bad.
Oh.
My uncle married her, and the girl was 10 when he married his mother, okay?
Whoa.
And I think for medical reasons, because she was sickly and the mother was sickly. And the mother dies, and he's coming back to the United States with his daughter. So he gets his brother John and his wife to be guardians because he's still in the military. And I never met my great uncle John either. And so, but anyway, they become guardians. And the nice thing I got out of that, even though what he did was bad, is that he constantly wrote John about his daughter. And when John died in 1977, I never met him. His wife outlived him, his second wife. She dies, and her grandchildren inherit the house from her first marriage, her grandchildren. And when I found him and located him, I used the church to tell me where he used to live, because he was a minister. He was a minister of their church. Yeah. And it was a rural address. So I said, I need to know what the actual address. And one of the deacons went to the house to see what the address today, and gave me the number. It was the wrong house, but it was the right house. It was the neighbor's house. It was the next door house, but the right house because it was my Uncle John's wife's sister living in it. And she gave me the grandchildren's name.
It's such fascinating stories, Char. Thank you so much for joining
we've run out of time. We could do hours probably.
Oh, so many interesting stories.
You come back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, we appreciate your sharing this because it points out that there are so many things that are similar in different people's research.
Yep. But at the end of the day, I mean, we all approach it basically the same way. It's just that sometimes you have to start at different places to be able to get there. So if you would join us at the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, we would be delighted for you to visit. We meet the third Tuesday of every month. And we also have a research center at the Holland Hall Center on 1500 Shenandoah Road. Please join us. We would love for you to be here.